So welcome to the Open Design Panel at COSCUP 2022. My name is Christoph. I'm a contributor to the Bitcoin design community. And while everyone here on the panel today is part of the design community or part of the larger Bitcoin ecosystem, we try to talk more generally about open design and share some of the stories about how everyone got here, what their motivations are, what their background are, and hopefully it's interesting to the larger audience as well. And then make sure to stay on afterwards because there's another presentation about open design that goes into more community. But I'll stop talking right now and hand it over right away for our panelists here to introduce themselves, talk a little bit about who they are, what they do, and how they get there. Bosch, why don't you kick us off? And you're muted.
Hey, all right, so yeah, my name's Bosch. I'm a Bitcoin product designer, I guess you could say. Being quite active in the Bitcoin space for 6 or so years. I had a few small startups that when I first got involved in it, that kind of led me down the path of being a product designer. Had a little bit of dev experience here or there. And throughout the years, I've been working on several open source projects. Most notably is probably the Bitcoin Design Guide, which everyone here in this call is a part of building, as well as a wallet called Zeus, which is like a Lightning Bitcoin wallet, which means it's just an easy way to make payments and stuff like that. But yeah, I'll move it on to Ed. Do you want to go next? I think you're muted as well.
Also muted. All right, we've got to get better at that. Yeah, hey, my name is Ed Pratt. I'm a product designer at primarily at PeakShift and also a contributor to open source Bitcoin projects. I've kind of been doing this for a few years now, and I think just as a fun fact, I believe I joined the Bitcoin design community around block height 633,000. Stephen, how you doing?
Hey, I'm not on mute, hopefully. I'm Stephen Delorme. So I also hang out in the Bitcoin design community. Before I worked in Bitcoin, I was a freelance web developer and then, did kind of creative ad agency type stuff before that. So now I'm full-time open source Bitcoin. I focus a lot of my efforts on the Bitcoin Design Guide, particularly around adding Lightning Network content. Like Bosch said, just it's a technology for making quick payments over Bitcoin. Also working on just kind of initiatives and campaigns to kind of push the Bitcoin industry forward to, kind of help projects coordinate and adopt new technologies. And I try to contribute time to other open source projects in the Bitcoin ecosystem as well. And I'm funded by Spiral so that I can do this kind of open source work full time. So maybe it would be good to kick it over to Conor next.
Hello. My name's Conor Okus. I'm also a contributor to the Bitcoin design community over the last kind of 18 months, 2 years. I currently work at Spiral. Spiral's an initiative to help, make Bitcoin like a global currency that everyone can use and is accessible to everyone, as well as helping push the open source Bitcoin ecosystem forward. And one of the ways we do that is, and I'm focused on, is funding designers. So we'll get a little bit into that a bit later, but I do a bit of everything, a bit of product management, a bit of software development, developer experience. But the things that are probably most relevant to this conversation and that you guys will probably be most interested in is the funding aspect of open source design work. So we'll definitely touch on that a bit later as well.
Awesome, thanks for those intros. And let's get right back to the name of this panel. Like, what does open design mean to you? How do you define it, and how do you practice it? Who wants to share some thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. I guess I could jump in on that. So I guess open design to me is, I guess in a really simple way to put it, is designing in the open. Like developers code in the open on GitHub and they publish all their code publicly. Open design pretty simply is designing in public, like you do, like developers do on GitHub, and making that all open. For example, the project Zeus that I mentioned at the start that I've been quite involved in for the past 2 years or so. Everything I do is completely open, all the design. We do public calls, we go do the reviews of the designs and stuff like that. So it very aligns with the whole ethos of open source tech and stuff like that. But yeah, I'll pass on to someone else if they have anything to add around that.
Yeah, and I think an important thing to note just about open design and open source in general is that, like, open design goes a step beyond just publishing your work for for free or publicly, because you could imagine like someone's a developer and they write code and they put it under an open source license and put it on GitHub, and that's fine. But that doesn't necessarily, just because the code is open, doesn't necessarily mean that the development process in which you build it is open. If all that happens behind closed doors, then it's just that the code's open source. It's kind of like a legal formality. It's not really like the product is being built out in the open. And so with open design, I think of it in a similar way. Like, you're not just like putting your Figma file out there or your design file for people to see. You're actually putting stuff out there and soliciting feedback and having these kind of conversations in public about what goals you're trying to meet with the product, and what trade-offs you might need to make, and getting input from people on how you're actually going to build this thing.
And so I think that's a really important point there. And just to add on to that, I think open design goes, if you share this more broadly, you can actually design things that are bigger than an individual or bigger than a group. And it's agencies, companies cannot necessarily do that because there's always certain hierarchies involved. But I also know a lot of designers, they're very hesitant about sharing their design and soliciting feedback. They're very protective. Is that something that you also had to struggle with, or that you had to overcome?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's there's like kind of a mentality in the graphic designer world that there's just there's always a joke about clients who want you to work for them for free, design a logo for them for free, build a website so you can get exposure, all that kind of stuff. So it's definitely something that as a designer, you're kind of, you have a knee-jerk reaction to it usually about people trying to get that stuff out of you. But if you think about it, and you should be concerned and worried about those things, because you have to take care of yourself and support yourself. But having said that, if you do work that's in a more of an open source manner, where it's like you're actually building a project that other people can jump in and contribute and help you maintain, and something that can like really help out, whether it's Bitcoin or whatever industry you're in. If you're actually building something that can be used by many people, that the whole industry can collaborate on, it's a different scenario than a client asking you to build a website for free. So it's just got to think about the kind of different use cases there.
Yeah, like just on your point about like big companies getting people to do free work for experience or whatever it may be, it's a little bit related to this, but I think contributing to open design or open source software as a designer is probably a much better path to take if you do want to get experience and do it for free, not get paid, and go contribute to projects where it's actually going to have some value, because open source is severely lacking most like designers and also product managers and stuff like that. So you can make an impact, learn a lot, and yeah, it's really a good path to take if you're new to design and you want to get your feet wet. And also learning open source and being involved in the open source community is a great way to deal with developers and learn how to work with developers, because that's going to be a big part of any designer's job, is like dealing with developers and handing off designs and stuff like that. So being involved in open source will teach you like the lingo and how they kind of do things, which is pretty valuable, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Just to add to that as well, I think that sometimes it can be, or it can feel maybe slightly intimidating getting involved in the open source realm, particularly when you're thrown into a community, especially like the Bitcoin community, where there are a lot of really amazing and quite inspiring Bitcoin projects out there which are actually kind of close to the ground and are open source and things that you can kind of get involved with. And I would just kind of advise people to go for it. We did kind of briefly touch upon the idea of kind of like process. Bosch kind of mentioned obviously learning about these relationships with developers and other designers, product managers, and things like that. And I think the open design has a slightly more interesting process. I think that instead of having a hierarchy, it's more of a democracy, but at least with a democracy, there kind of has to be clearer rules of how things are going to work, how designs get implemented, project management processes, design systems. So that's one thing to bear in mind as well, I think, which is actually quite a good tool for kind of learning about the professional realm as well, is like how to work with people, but also how to sort of work within processes and kind of self-regulate and self-manage other people within projects as well.
Speaking about difficulties, what was something that you really struggled with getting into this? That was a burden for you until you could kind of figure it out. Was there something specific you can share?
Well, I think I've had a slightly interesting journey into kind of open source and the open design realm, in that I've actually never really done closed source projects. I kind of left university and went straight into it, got kind of interested in Bitcoin, and then started designing, doing products and a bunch of startups and things, which were all kind of open source in the end. So it's kind of actually the only process which I know. So a lot of the frustrations and feedbacks are probably just like relative to that. I think in my particular experience, though, just kind of getting into it, particularly the Bitcoin design community as well, just a lot of really talented people in here. I think sometimes it's kind of hard just to know where to start and how to kind of start your journey in open design. And the Bitcoin design community was actually really, really great for that. And even just seeing the amount of people that are kind of posting in the Slack, looking for projects to work on, or people who are looking for feedback on their projects, people who don't currently have designers but are looking for designers. Like, there's actually so much to get involved with and so much material to kind of digest and grasp. So I would just advise people to just jump in the deep end, really, and just swim, because it's I think it's easier than it looks. You just kind of have to get a little bit acquainted with the process, is what I'd say.
Yeah, I was literally going to say exactly the same thing, because when you join this community with thousands of members at this point, it can be like a bit daunting to, speak up and make your voice heard. But I think there's so much value that you can add straight away, even if it's just like reviewing someone's piece of work. Like, that in and of itself will, one, help you understand like what value they're trying to add. It will help you build a relationship with that person or people who are working on that specific work. And I would also say it does take time. Like, joining any community, like in everyday life or in the virtual world, it oftentimes takes a bit of just time for people to get familiar with your communication style and the current processes and things that are already in place in that community. So I would urge people to be patient, but the Bitcoin design community specifically is very welcoming and very friendly. So, if you do identify aspects of work where you feel like you can add value, feel free to reach out to different members in the community, or leave a message in the Slack channel to be practical, or leave a issue on GitHub, for example, and kind of make your voice heard that way.
Stephen, you have anything to add there, or?
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's probably one of the challenges, if you're coming in from a non-open source world, like if you're a designer coming in from like more of an agency environment, then it's going to be weird to you, just the kind of absolute anarchy of open source, just in that, you no longer have, it depends on the project, right? But not all projects have clear decision makers, and that's okay. But it's something you have to get used to, I think. in terms of being able to like put your work out there and, like not, tell other people what to do, but you're trying to argue your case, like, argue for like, okay, this is the way I think that we should approach this. Here's the reasons why. And so you have kind of a absolute freedom, and that nobody can really, force anybody to do anything. I mean, some people are volunteers, some people have grants. It just depends on, what open source community you're in. But yeah, you definitely have to kind of find good ways to manage your own time, and also get kind of creative with how you, arrive at decision making when, consensus is so distributed.
So is it worth doing that?
Yeah, I think so, but I think it depends on what you're trying to build. I mean, the thing is that it depends on what you want to build. There's a situation where you may need to move quick on something you're trying to build, and if you're trying to move quick on something, then maybe you want a more like traditional startup environment where and the code is going to be as closed source, and the team can iterate very, very quickly and ship something a lot quicker because the decision makers and what they're building is very, very clear. That might maybe you think of that as one end of the spectrum, and then on the other end of the spectrum, maybe you have just completely open source, completely democratized project, and it might be that over the course of 10 years, that project becomes incredibly powerful and incredibly well built, and tons of people all around the world use it, and it's interoperable and blah, blah, blah. And that's good, but it took 10 years to get to that point because the kind of slower open source, nature, it might have moved a little bit slower to get there. That's not to say that all open source is slow. Sometimes open source is incredibly quick. I'm just saying that, you have to think about what it is you're trying to build and what the trade-offs are.
Yeah. Bosch, you wanted to add something there earlier?
Yeah, like everyone covered pretty much all the points I was going to bring up, but just I guess one bit of advice of getting into open source or open source in general and open source design to avoid kind of some issues is I think it's a good idea to like work on more than one project. Like, for example, I worked on Zeus. I've also contributed to quite a few others, but like Stephen said, there's no direct decision maker, so sometimes things can feel like they aren't progressing, which they are. There's just open source nature of things. Sometimes things move slow, so it's good to have other stuff to work on, because if you just focus on one project and then nothing's really happening there, you kind of like, what do I do? Like you want to have some other things that you kind of jump around and contribute to, and open source is good like that. You can kind of contribute to multiple things and have your fingers in a lot of pies, which I think is a big benefit of working in open source and open design. So
yeah, one of the points that I keep thinking about is it sounds very messy, and it kind of is, and it is that way because there's a lot of individual freedom. But what glues everything together is because you get a lot of people that have the same idea. They want something specific to exist, they think is worthwhile, and because they care a lot about it, they make it work, despite some of these people might be spread across all over the world through different time zones. Some people take vacation whenever they feel like, or they disappear and come back into a project because they all care about the same thing. That's kind of what makes it worthwhile, that type of mission. I think we're getting fairly close to the end here already. I just wanted to bring up the topic of sustainability and funding one more time. And Conor, what do you have any more thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll try and be quick and not too long-winded. But yeah, I guess we've spoken a lot about open source design, but specifically, like, what do you do if you're a designer and you've identified like a piece of work that you want to do, whether it be, if we're speaking specifically about the Bitcoin design community, whether it be like a more art-focused initiative that wants to help tell a different narrative around Bitcoin, whether you want to contribute directly to the Bitcoin design community, whether you want to collaborate on a wallet initiative, whether you want to see interoperability across different apps and wallets with regards to specific UX patterns, whatever it might be. Once you've got to that point and you say, yeah, you want to work on it on a full-time basis, it's very likely that you're going to need to be able to support yourself financially throughout that time period that you've identified as getting that work complete. And one of those options is like what we do at Spiral, where we provide grants to designers to work on a specific piece of work that they've identified. So typically it will work where, you know, you submit a proposal about like how you think this piece of work is going to improve the user experience in Bitcoin, and we'll kind of evaluate it along with like some of our close relationships in the wider community as well. And if there's like consensus around this piece of work, we'll like work with you to provide no strings attached funding. Typically like it's over a year, but we have extended a lot of grants as well. And like the guys on the panel have said, making your impact in open source can in some instances take 2, 3, 4 years maybe. So that's why we tend to give designers and developers at least a year to kind of make their mark, and hopefully beyond that as well. But Spiral is one kind of place where you could, you know, propose something and we'd evaluate it and get funding that way. But we do try to also encourage designers and developers to have multiple sources of funding as well. So there are other organizations out there that also support mainly developers at this point, but we're hoping over time that more designers would get support as well. Maybe we can like give the viewers like a resource list of some of those organizations at a later point, but I'm sure if you do enough Googling, you'll find them. But the premise is ultimately the same. So ultimately the goal is to not have any one design or developer project dependent on a single source of funding. Hopefully the projects that we work on in the Bitcoin space will be deemed public goods over the long term, and enough of the community and society see enough value in it to want to see its maintenance and its upkeep over a long time. But again, this is like the long game, and we've got quite a long way to go there. But that is one opportunity amongst like a variety of different ways developers can get funding, everything from GitHub sponsors to direct peer-to-peer relationships that you might have with people, large organizations like exchanges. So there's quite an array of options, just depending on like your time frame, the project you're working on. So yeah, I mean, if people want to learn more about it, they can feel free to reach out to me as well.
Excellent. Yeah, and I would also just add one more thing, is that it's also up to us designers to make a case for design, because I don't think we're quite there yet. I think it's been kind of accepted with development, with code, that there is this value and that it's worth supporting it, also financially. But designers, I feel like we still have to make that case a little bit. And, you know, we're creative people and we present our work all the time. So I think everybody here, everybody in the audience, you know, you kind of know what to do if you want to be part of this. Hopefully this was a helpful panel and interesting, and you got to hear some insights from some of these really engaged, super talented people here. Thank you all for being part of this panel. And Bosch would like to speak, as he's just letting me just know. So what's up, Bosch?
Yeah, I'd just quickly like to say, if you want to like come follow any of us or join the community, I don't think anyone plugged it, but it's bitcoin.design, and you can join our Slack. It's like got about 3,000 people who all work on Bitcoin open source related stuff. But yeah, just thought I'd plug that in there really quickly.
Awesome. And we're recording this panel ahead of time, but there will be technically QA happening right after this, and we'll hopefully all be there in person, and then we can answer your questions. But thanks for tuning in right now.